Good morning.
Good morning.
Please feel free to move around a bit if it's easier for you to see or a little more comfortable. It's kind of active summer morning, ripping boards across the street and children banging on instruments. And that was bringing back a memory of mine when I was in monastic training at a monastery. The monastery where I was in Japan is called Daijoji. And there were many monks when I was there at that time. Maybe there was 35 or so of us. And in a monastic situation, there are many teachers. There's not just one teacher. And so one of the important teachers is called the Godo. And so there's the abbot, and then the abbot kind of is overseeing everything, and they have a lot more outward kind of a face for the temple. And the Godo's kind of in charge of training. And then there's another position called Tanto, which is really more involved in the training. The Godo kind of oversees the training, and then the Tanto is really involved. So when I was there, the Godo was a windbag. I mean, he just would talk during Zazen for long, long periods of time. And to make it worse, I thought what he was saying was really stupid. And of course I'm young, arrogant monk. Now I'm a middle-aged, arrogant monk. But I was young, arrogant monk, and I was so furious. Because we were in the retreat, and he's just talking, and he's not even, the one thing he's been encouraging us for our meditation or something, or giving us some tips, but he was just kind of talking about how meditation was good for your health or something, which I thought was just the wrong reason to meditate, Anyway, I had all these pains, and he would just go on and on and on. And I got to the point where I just was going to scream. I just was going to say, shut up, which would not have been good. And I realized that. And I was just at the end of my rope. And so when you're in that kind of monastic training, one thing that's, there's a lot of things that are difficult about it, and one of the things that's nice about it is that you can go to a teacher's room, you take a stick of incense, and you go to their room and you knock, and it's their responsibility to receive you pretty much whenever they can. And then, so I went to the Tanto, who was he was kind of my ideal of what a monk would be like. He was so quiet, during Zazen at least. Anyway, I really respected him a lot. So I took a stick of incense, I went, I knocked on the door, he let me in. And you offer incense to their brazier and you make prostrations. If you come and see me here in my room, that very similar kind of situation. And then you sit and you can ask them a question, or if you have something on your mind. And so I went, and I went, I am so frustrated. The Godo is such a windbag. He won't stop talking. It's just driving me crazy. I don't know what I'm gonna do. And he looked at me and he said, Ejo, do you get angry at the sound of the wind in the trees? And it was like something just melted away. It was very kind of cliche, Zen thing to say. But from his mouth, really was medicine for me. And it was like all of this that I had, which was mostly about me, very little about the Godo, actually. I just kind of seeped away. Sometimes it's like that. You have a turning point, and then you just know something after that. Now, did I wish the Godo would shut up? Yes. But there was just some ease with it that came from that moment. And so I think about that often when there's I think Sunday morning, really? That's when you pick to do that? And then I think I'd like to live in a place where there's kind of an agreement. Sunday morning, it's time to be quiet. And I have all this fantasy world about not listening to people's, what are those things? Those awful demonic devices. Yes, leaf blowers or whatever, And then I remember the Tanto Kokuaroshi. Do you get angry about such things? The world's full of suffering. That's a silly thing to get too bad up shit. And then I try to do my practice. Anyway, there are some reflections. So I'd like to continue to talk about the Dragon Girl, Ryujo. This is the third week, and some of you have been here for previous talks, and some people haven't. I'll review a little bit. This is a story that's in the Lotus Sutra, which is one of the really central texts of Mahayana Buddhism in general, particularly is one of the most important scriptures for Japanese Buddhism. So it deeply affected Buddhism all over East Asia, but Japan particularly, the state Buddhism of the kind of like end of the last and beginning of the last millennia, like 900, 1000, 1100, that 1200. The state Buddhism of the time, it was a Buddhist country, was Lotus Sutra based. And so all of the educational system, everything was just founded in the Lotus Sutra. So almost all of Japanese Buddhism is really, really deeply affected by the Lotus Sutra, even if they don't take the Lotus Sutra as one of their primary texts. And for our school of Buddhism, Soto Zen, Dogen Zenji, the founder of our school, who lived in the 1200s in Japan, he grew up in that kind of environment where the Lotus Sutra was basically the way that people saw the world was based in the Lotus Sutra, whether they thought very much about it or not. Much in the same way that if you grew up in a very Christian environment, maybe you reject Christianity at some point, but you still are basically, your worldview is deeply affected by that. So, so the Lotus Sutra is really important for that reason. And then the references, you know, as people are teaching, or various teachings of ancestors and things, particularly through Japan, but not only through Japan, they're dropping little references, and then if you know something about the Lotus Sutra, then you catch the reference. They don't usually footnote it, right? That's a really big difference. We oftentimes will explain the reference on purpose, especially if it's a like a kind of a scholarly pursuit. But it's almost opposite in East Asian culture. Like, you make all these references, and the more learned you are, the more references you'll get. That's kind of the idea. And when you don't get the references, that's okay. You're getting what it is for you to get. And then over time, you start building more of a relationship with things. So Dragon Girl is one of these references that you might hear as you're studying Mahayana Buddhism, particularly as it comes through Japan. And she shows up in a few different places. The Lotus Sutra is one place, but she also shows up in other places too. Then the Lotus Sutra, in this story, there's this meeting between Manjushri Bodhisattva, who's the Bodhisattva of wisdom, and the Bodhisattva of accumulated wisdom, who's come from another world with his teacher, Abundant Treasures Buddha. And they're there in this vast assembly, and in the vast assembly, they're having this discussion. And accumulated wisdom Bodhisattva asks Manjushri Bodhisattva, he says, when you were teaching at the bottom of the ocean in the palaces of the Naga king, was there anyone who could achieve enlightenment very quickly? Because mostly it takes a long time. All the stories are about lifetime after lifetime after lifetime after lifetime of deep, steady practice is what leads to awakening. And so accumulated wisdom asks this kind of almost deviant question, right? It's a little bit radical. It's like, is there such thing as just getting it? And Manjushri Bodhisattva, I always imagine, it doesn't say in the sutra, but I imagine that he smiles, maybe a little kind of a wry smile. And he says, yes, there is one. It is the dragon girl. That's what it means if the Chinese heritage means. Dragon girl. She's 8 years old, and she lives at the bottom of the ocean. She's the daughter of the king of the Eastern Seas. And she is, and he says, she's eloquent and kind and quick, and she gets it like that. And as he's talking about that, she emerges from the ocean, she bows to the Buddha, and she stands to one side. And accumulated wisdom is like, nah, this can't really work. I mean, you're a girl, you're 8. You know, this is like not what I see as being awakening. And then Manjushri assures accumulated wisdom that she's a great teacher. And then Shariputra, who's throughout the sutra, throughout many sutras, is a person who's getting educated. Oftentimes we're the Shariputra, right? Shariputra gives a voice of like doubt or an old kind of rigid way of thinking about things. And then the Buddha or other beings are teaching Shariputra about things. So in this part of the sutra, that's also happening. And so Shariputra weighs in. He's like, come on, you gotta be kidding me. More than accumulated wisdom Bodhisattva. He's just like, that's just no way. And so Gyujo, the dragon girl, she takes a priceless jewel out of the fold of her robes, and she comes before the Buddha and she makes an offering. The Buddha accepts it directly right away, and then she stands to the side and she says to Shariputra, she says, Shariputra, I just made this offering to the Buddha. Did the Buddha not accept it very quickly? Shariputra says, yes, it was more than quick, it was immediate. And I also imagine here, she smiles wryly. She says, even quicker than that. She becomes a great Buddha in a universe bajillions of miles away called spotless. And she becomes a Buddha and teaches the whole assembly that's there from her lotus throne. And the chapter ends. So I love the story for a lot of different reasons. And as I've mentioned, one of the reasons is it just shakes things up a little bit. And that's part of the purpose. It's like, well, you think you know what awakening is like? I mean, there's the one layer, which is just about prejudice, right? And overturning some prejudice. So that's great. I'm really, I like that part about the story. But also think about the way that all of our very subtle, unarticulated expectations about what spiritual wisdom or spiritual fulfillment would look like in our life. You've got a story of that. Right? So part of your job in practice is to uncover your Shariputra. Uncover what's your story about what is possible or impossible, what's true, what's untrue, what kind of experiences are worthy of noticing, remembering, enshrining, pursuing, questioning, and what are the ones that you quickly sweep under the rug. And then why it's very easy to look at this story and say, God, patriarchy again, which I encourage you to do that and groan a little bit, but then also see like, what's your 8-year-old girl? Right? If you lived at that time in that place where that was seen as kind of the least possible being to be awakened. Who have you decided is that person? Who do you sweep under the rug quickly? There's another layer of encountering our own prejudice in a more subtle form. The dragon girl is known by another name. Another name is the bearer of gifts. And this jewel is very important. The one way to understand this legend is it's about value. How do we value things? How did Shariputra devalue? Because he had a rigid mindset about what was possible and who was worthy, who was valuable, and what was the quality of their consciousness, of their heart, of their mind. It's a legend about intimacy, about an intimate path. Not a kind of path that you could say, oh yeah, it takes a really, really long time, but let me tell you what the stages are. There's 10. And it goes like this. There's the first one, the second one, you do this one, turn left at the place, and go like that kind of map. A map is wonderful, and maps are helpful to us, but the map is not the journey. And so part of the story is also inviting us into that exploration. What is most intimate? What is the heart of the matter? What is our quality of vision? You know, I'd mentioned last week that the heart, we tend to think of it as the organ of emotion. That's our tendency. We think of the heart. And you think of somebody who's very heartful or heartfelt, you kind of think of like a lot of emotionality, which it is. But a little bit changed there. Oftentimes the heart is considered the organ of vision. I don't mean physical sight. I mean our capacity to imagine, our capacity to encounter, our capacity to hold phenomena in our mind. That sounds very kind of theoretical, but I mean, just if you see a beautiful flower, like these flowers on the altar, well, often they are today. I was noticing this over here, and to hold that flower in your heart takes something. It takes a kind of vision, which isn't just seeing in a mechanical sense. So if you think of the heart as a jewel, the heart as something intimate, heart as a capacity to encounter, to hold, to touch, and to be touched. That's what I mean by vision. So in this story, this question about immediate awakening, the dragon girl, the bearer of gifts, she brings forth this jewel, this heart, this, we could say, I. It is this precious jewel. And in the sutra, it says it's a jewel that's so precious, it's worth the 3,000-fold thousand world, which is a very funny way to try to explain this thing, which is in Buddhism, which is like, sometimes it's referred to as the triple world. Or, but if you read it a little close, the way it's written in Chinese is the 3,000 great thousand world. And what it means is like, okay, a great world is like a galaxy full of 1 billion worlds that each have their own central mountain, Mount Sumeru. And we have that too. And so everything we know is centered around this Mount Sumeru. So there's 1 billion of those, like 1 billion cosmoses. So that's one of these worlds. And so there's 1,000 of those. And then the reason the language gets funny is there's 1,000 of those worlds that have 1,000. It's not 3,000. It's like 1,000 with the little 3 up above. What do you call it? To the power of 3? Like it's 1,000 worlds of the 1,000 worlds of the 1,000 worlds that are 1 billion cosmoses that we know. Buddhism is great for these kind of images. It comes from its Indian roots. It's like just beyond, 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 beyond. So it's one way we could understand that is this jewel, the Lotus Sutra says, it has the value of everything we could conceive of, and beyond that. This is the value of the jewel that she gives to the Buddha. You know, it's the heart of the world, or the heart of all worlds, or the heart of all possible worlds. That's what we call the jewel. And it's whole. Almost everything, you know, we can touch it, we could see it, we could talk about it, and it becomes a part of something. And that's fine, but that's always in a kind of partial way of thinking about it. We think that, oh, it's a jewel. Okay, she has a jewel. Like there's the girl, Yujo, and she has the jewel, and then there's the Buddha, and there's Shariputra, there's Manjushri, and there's accumulated wisdom Bodhisattva, and there's abundant treasures Buddha. You know, like here are all these beings, and like they're kind of separate. Now she's pulling out this jewel, which includes everything. That's the quality of that jewel. If you go back to the famous image of jewels that's in the Huayan teaching, flower garden teaching, the beautiful image of the Indra's net. And Indra's net is a kind of like a metaphor for how everything is. And it says that everything is a jewel. But the quality of that jewel, it's not just you're a jewel and I'm a jewel separately, but each jewel reflects every other jewel, as if it was a jewel that sat in a net, like you know, the nodes in a net, and each of those jewels reflected every other jewel. But it's a 3-dimensional net, right? So it doesn't just go in a plane, it goes in 3 dimensions. Actually, it's probably multi-dimensional. It's probably bajillions of dimensions net that goes in everything. So every jewel reflects every other jewel. Huayan teachings tell us this is how things actually are. They don't mean just like metaphorically, like wouldn't it be groovy if we cared about each other in that way? They're saying that's actually how things exist. Each one of those jewels is like an eye. It's like the capacity to see and to be seen. This is the jewel that she had. We could call it a wisdom jewel, a jewel of clear seeing. And everything's included in it. And she knows that. Right? And she gives it to the Buddha. She gives her heart, the heart of the world. She presents it as an offering. to make that offering, she has to look into the eye of the Buddha. And the Buddha looks into her eye. And with that looking, the offering can be made. Now, the reason that I'm coming back to this again and again and again is because this is our life on the path. It's not a life of just kicking ourselves into shape or doing the long, hard work that will get you to a particular place. You have to do the long, hard work if you want to transform your life, right? But you won't be able to do the long, hard work if you don't learn to make the offering of your heart. The work's not possible. Offering your heart is not easy. She makes it look easy, right? She says, it's immediate. And it is. But for us to make that offering, she's a great teacher for us. She's kind of leading us up to the cliff, she said. You're going to stay on the known? You're going to stay on the safe shore here? Or you're going to try something? You have to go beyond your Shariputra mind. Now, in the Lotus Sutra, one of the most central teachings of the Lotus Sutra in general is something called expedient means, or sometimes you'll hear it called skillful means. Upaya is the word in Pali, or hoben in Japanese. So one of the big questions is we hear a legend like this, and even maybe I've convinced you. Maybe you are like, yeah, I want to give the jewel of my heart to the Buddha. But then it's like, how the heck do I do that? Right? You know, what does that mean? What is the way in which I practice that? And that's one of the things about Buddhism in general. I say particularly our school is it's crushingly beautiful to my mind. The legends and the imagery and all of the things that can come into your heart and really inform your intuitive felt sense of aliveness. But sometimes it just stops there and you're like, could you just tell me something to do? Yes. But the trick there is if the something that you're told to do goes back into the old reference system of kicking yourself around, to pulling yourself up by your own bootstraps, whatever it is, then it doesn't work. I mean, it has some effect, but it's not really leading you on the path that the Buddha has made possible for us to all be. And so that's where the trick comes. Like, can I receive a direct teaching about how to do something or what I should do in a concrete sense? That doesn't just lead back to that kind of mechanical shoving my life around trying to get things in order, but actually opens, actually is a gift, is actually me being the bearer of gifts for the world. How does that happen? So in the Lotus Sutra, the teaching about that is called these expedient means, or these skillful means, or upaya. The Buddha is said to be able to give every being according to their causes and conditions, according to their situation, according to the quality of their being. They will get a very perfect teaching about what to do, how to live. And this has big ramifications for Buddhist philosophy, or, I mean, you can't exactly use the word theology for Buddhism, but we use it here. It has big ramifications for that. And you see it show up in a lot of different places, this kind of skillful means. Sometimes in really unskillful ways, like when people do really unethical things, like teachers do unethical things, and then their followers say, oh, it must be a skillful means, right? They're just teaching us something by doing something unethical. That's the only possible explanation, because teachers can't do anything wrong, right? Make sure that there's a sharp point on that. I'm joking. So sometimes it ends up in some difficult, some problematic places. Sometimes it becomes a kind of polemic. It's a way to criticize previous ways of understanding Buddhism and saying, well, they were just expedient means. We've got the real juice here. That's the one that really bugs me. I mean, they all bug me, but the one that really bugs me is it totally misses the point of expedient means. It's like, the point of expedient means is the real juice is not, you can't fathom it. If you're claiming to have the real juice, that's kind of the really big sign you don't, right? Yeah. like the Buddha doesn't even claim to have it. In fact, in the Lotus Sutra, it says only a Buddha together with another Buddha can fathom this truth. It's a little bit even more technical than that. It says alone Buddha together with a Buddha, which is totally like almost nonsensical. The Buddha has to be totally alone and yet is with another Buddha. Shakyamuni and Ryujo, a Buddha and a Buddha. They can fathom something. But for us, when we receive a teaching, it comes in a form. And that form may be in contradiction to other teachings. It may be different than what we've seen before, but it's just for us. In the Lotus Sutra, it says that the teachings of the Buddha are like the Dharma rain. It all falls, it's all the same rain, and it's all falling on the forest, and every living thing in the forest receives the rain in its own way, in the way that it needs to. Some are small, some's just like a little moss, some's like a great, tree. And each one of them utilizes the Dharma in the way that is important for them to utilize it. This is a kind of image about expedient means. One way that I try to think about or make a little explanation is most things, like if you're standing in the backyard of the temple and someone said, "Where's the Jizo hall?" That's the hall where the children eat. You could just point over there. And then if you went to the front of the temple and someone said, "Where's the Jizo hall?" then you would point that way. Like it stays in the same place in reference to you. You move over here. If you went to our neighbors over there, then you would point this direction to say where the Jizo hall is. If you went to those neighbors over there, then you would point this way. So it all stays in the same place. You move around and then you can point to it. How about the moon? What happens with the moon if you're standing in the backyard here like we do when we have a full moon days with special ceremony? And oftentimes the moon's coming up over here. And it's big and bright, right? And then we have the ceremony and then I'm walking back up to my house, which is just 100 yards or so that way. And you don't have to change the direction you point, right? You just point, like you just hold your arm up like this and walk home. Right? Now the moon's behind a tree. Now the moon's behind your neighbor's house. Right? Now the moon's behind the telephone pole. It's very different than something that's located in the terrain that you're in. And it's fantastical in that way. And we say the Buddha's wisdom is the same way. The moon will show up through the territory that you're in from a place that doesn't change. I mean, of course, the moon's changing all the time, going all these different places. But it's that quality which meets you. The moon doesn't hide from you because you walked up the street. It just shows you the face of the place that you are. And all of the causes and conditions that you're part of are part of the way that you see the moon in that moment. Same could be true for the sun, but I don't recommend staring at it. So expedient means they are given to us, they appear to us, they are revealed to us as we look into the eye of the Buddha by making an offering of our deep consciousness, our heart. There's only really one teaching, but it reaches all of us in the way that we can hear it. This is the teaching that we need. So to try to put this into practice is to keep our eyes open, keep the eye of our heart open, to feel what it is that we are being given by the Buddha. What are we being given to uncover the next thing in our life? This is not complicated. Just like the Buddha giving, or the Ryujo, the dragon girl giving the jewel to the Buddha, this is a very immediate action. In our school, we call it zazen. We call it meditation. And right away, your mind will take up like a Shariputra mind. You say like, well, I'm not sitting 40 minutes. I'm sitting in lotus posture. I'm doing this, I'm doing that. And am I doing it right? And all that kind of mind will come up very quickly.
If it isn't coming up for you right now, it will come up for you when you sit down and you think like, okay, I'm going to meditate. So here's the dialogue. Shariputra is present in this legend, but Vyujo is trying to teach everyone something. And she says, fine, Shariputra, let me show you. It's not so hard. Actually, take your vision, take what you know as most intimate, give it the space to just simply offer that in the direction of what is most noble, of what you know as most noble, as what you know as most luminous. That's what we're doing when we're sitting in meditation. We're not hacking off the unworthy parts of ourselves. We're just saying, let me be present enough that I can feel this jewel. And then let me look into the eye of something that is beyond and be seen by that thing. When we're doing that, you know something. And oftentimes it's very concrete. It might be, I wish I hadn't yelled at that clerk at the store a couple days ago. I didn't actually do that with someone I was buying. I have done that. All right. That was great. I think I told that story last week too. And then the guy, right away, he saw it. He knew. I was having a little talk with him. He's trying to exchange a dollar bill, and she couldn't because the clerk couldn't open the thing. And he was a little, very slightly terse with the clerk, almost unnoticeably. And then as we were walking out, I gave him one of my $1. I changed for one of my dollars, and then we were kind of BSing as we were walking out. He's like, I shouldn't have been so short with the clerk. He knew right away. I was so encouraged by that. We all have that capacity when we take that and we put it forward. We know something, and then there's a concrete practice possible. One thing for me these days that I'm really seeing is I get to spend a little more time with my grandson, who's just as cute as a Dickens. I don't exactly know how to pay attention to, which comes as a real surprise to me because I spend so much time with children, and I have known how to pay attention to and to be really present with children and raising up my kids. That was really just very fluid to me. And now it's like, oh wow, what happened? It's not fluid for me in the same way that it was before. How do I just sit and see him and be seen by him? That's a practice which I'm taking up. But I can't do that if I don't put something out beyond my own idea of what the path is, of who I am, of what I'm doing. I have to see past that. And that's what the Buddha's face offers. So I would encourage you, from this story of the Dragon Girl, which has many facets that you could be interested in, be interested in this facet. What is your jewel? How do you know it? And what is it to offer it? And what is it to offer it to this face, which has, it's like a face of totality. This isn't something that you can figure out. It's something you have to do differently than the usual slugging away. And just like I was mentioning, seeing the flower and being able to hold that image, being able to hold the presence of the flower because of the presence of your own consciousness. That's the reason you can encounter the flower, right? And flowers are so great because they're beautiful. A lot of things aren't so beautiful. Which is also fine. You can behold the dog poo. My grandson pooed in the bath the other day. It's so funny, Anyway, so it could be poo. And then you go, oh, like, why am I not separate from this? Like, that's the immediate truth of the situation, right? And so that's the thing you have. That's the jewel. and you just step in, and then you'll know something. So that's all to say, you know what to do. Have time for a couple questions or comments.
Sure.
Mhm.
I have a big collection of books, and when I look at them, the ones I read long ago, I've always highlighted things. And so I'll highlight here and there, and 10, 20 years later, I look at them, and I find it strange and odd and sometimes appalling what stood out to me at the time. And so I wondered, when we're confronting teachings or wisdom and stories, when there are things that stand out to us, how do we know whether it's standing out because it's something that's useful, that's helpful, and going to open us up, versus something that we're using as like body armor, like to defend the way that I do stuff. The right way to do stuff is this, and that person is doing it like this. And I just wondered, how do we approach it while we're in that moment of selecting out little bits?
I would say the basic thing is, does it lead to more questions, or does it lead to an explanation? If it leads to an explanation, then it can serve its purpose, but let the explanation drop away. Read the book again, get a different copy without all your yellow stuff in it, or just highlight the whole thing. As you're going along, if you keep reading it and other things come out, and highlight those, then pretty soon the whole thing's highlighted. But as long as, there's one thing I love about the Lotus Sutra is the Lotus Sutra is always teaching the Lotus. It's always talking about teaching the Lotus Sutra. It's like it's a circle that's turning in a circle and a circle and a circle and a circle, and that's how our minds actually are. They're not fixed, and but because we cling to a certain sense of ourself, then we start to calcify things because we need to protect that certain sense of self that we're clinging to, and so that's not evil. That's very natural and deluded, which is also very natural to be deluded, but that causes pain for us and for others. And so what we do is just recognize that, recognize the naturalness of that process, and recognize that it comes about through all of us, and then say, okay, when I arrive at some understanding and it's starting to become an explanation, let me try to shift the explanation to a furthering question. What are the implications of this way of seeing? Where does it take me next? Where does it take me next? Then when we interact with the teachings or the legends or the mythology, it comes alive, because it's not just an inert thing which we're getting evidence from. It is a living teaching which then lives through our own minds, and our own creativity is part of that sutra living through us. How do we live the Lotus Sutra? That becomes the question. And if you do that long term with a particular set of legends, then they really start to live in you. We have so many legends now, so much entertainment is our legends now. So it's like, oh yeah, I saw that movie, go to the next. Oh, I saw that movie, go to the next. I saw that movie, go to the next. And there's recurring themes, and maybe things develop, but we don't have that same kind of repetition of a set of stories that help seed something in us and grow through us, because we kind of put them aside. I already heard that story. I know about that. And then they're also, okay, I'll stop it. They're also, usually these stories have some very interesting details, but they're also just usually not very satisfying. There's not the kick-ass art, car chase and the bad guy gets killed, and then at the end you kind of feel like, like emotionally at rest. I hate that about American movies. It's like, it's just so, okay, it's dull. Like you get done and you just feel done with it. And these kind of legends usually don't give you that. They usually feel like, okay, I've just encountered this thing and it's very interesting, but I don't feel like there's a resolution. And that's the purpose.
Ojo-san.
Hi.
Over the years, I've noticed a theme or a question that comes up quite a lot in the assembly, and that is a sense that I'm giving so much. Like I'm offering, I don't have anything left to give. Like I'm volunteering, I'm doing all, and that's not actually what I wanted to ask about, but I think it's an interesting reality that a lot of people face and how to work with that. But recently, my nephew, he's like at this age where he's the only one of he's the only grandson of, and like the only nephew. And so he's receiving a lot, and people like love giving him things. And I've been observing that people showered him with gifts, and it's almost like they don't even know that they're just sort of like, it's just I'm just giving these things. And I guess my question is how when we make this offering of this jewel of our life, how do we observe or appreciate the receiving, the part of that that action that is not the act anymore, right? We've done this act, and now we have to deal with the fact that it's been received.
So I'd say the very straightforward face of that is that's the expedient means. So you have to feel for what is it calling you to? What is it pointing out? And when that offering is truly made, it will point to something. And the Buddha is not stingy at all with pointing out. And so in that offering, you have to listen very carefully for what is the pointing out, what is the face that's appearing to you, not a kind of generalized sense of satisfaction, which is kind of the self staying in its own, not really offering the jewel, but kind of staying in its own, well, I'm making this offering and now I've given it to the Buddha, but really I haven't given it to the Buddha because it's just here inside of me. And that actual giving will see like, oh, there's something that needs done. And so that's what we pay attention to. And so, that's why I was saying earlier, like with my grandson, he's in the same situation, right? He's just like, he's obviously the center of the universe, he knows that. And everyone's just giving him. But I feel like if I really am giving over the jewel, I can see like, oh, I'm not, I see a place where I need some medicine and I want to pay attention to. So sometimes it comes out as a kind of a fault or a thing that you need to work on, but then sometimes it just looks like a very clear path. It's like, oh, just walk through that door. It's not about what you have done or aren't doing, or you need to make your character better or anything. It's just like, just go through that door. Or sometimes it's stop. It's just stop. It can be anything, really. But that's the freedom with which the Buddha will teach. So that's one side. The other side is, or another side, is that the Buddha who's receiving this jewel is nowhere other than the jewel itself or our own heart. And so actually learning to receive is equally important as learning to give the offering. Reason I don't usually front that teaching is for whatever causes and conditions we're in now, we're so prepared to make everything self-referential. So if we have the teaching is like, well, you're giving the jewel, you're giving it to yourself. Like in kind of where we are now, that just goes right into this, it all becomes self-referential. And what this teaching has to tell us is like, actually, the self-referential is the jail that we live in. And Yujo's willing to like, break out. And so that's why I usually emphasize the giving side of it. But whenever you really give the jewel, that's the Buddha of your own being, which receives the jewel, and the Ryujo of your life, which is giving the jewel to you. Hi.
So they're like kind of referring to the readings, but more from an internal sense, with the doubt, disorientation, discomfort, disheartening. How do I receive the jewel when it's like I feel when I try to have that introspection and that presence that it's just overwhelmed by things that seem like a barrier? Do I just sit and be with that? Or?
So when you sit and and give some space and feel for the, I'm using the term to feel for the jewel, which has to, it's all possible worlds are what that jewel is. So you have to really open the space to be able to recognize it. And then when you do recognize and you feel that kind of overwhelm, then the question is, what's the medicine that responds to that overwhelm or those barriers? And the way you find out what that medicine is just the willingness of your own heart to pay attention to what's there. And then with that willingness to pay attention to what's there, listen for what is being given to you as a way to practice with it. And that can come from a lot of different places. Maybe you're reading some books about Buddhism and it has some teachings like, oh, you can practice this way. Or maybe you're working with a teacher and they've given you some particular practice and some way to work with it. Maybe there's something that you've known in the past that helps you face that thing. Those are all expedient means. And they're whole. They're not just like tools to get you somewhere. They actually are the thing that allows you to include all of the worlds in your own heart and stay present with it. So it's just that oftentimes the way we look at those tools is in a kind of very well, we come at it just the opposite way, like we're fabricating something. Like I want to fabricate an okay self. And so I kind of want to like take the not okay self and saw some pieces off and nail some pieces on. And that's how we use the tools. And it can work to a certain degree, but it doesn't really work in the way that what the Buddha's offering is saying, no, actually you have those tools are all important, but because they're tools of heart, they're not about fabricating something. They're about staying present with something that is already whole, even though we can't see it that way often. And that's the difference between an expedient means and a technique.